The plane had barely rolled to a stop on the Zurich tarmac when Darius Cole felt it, that unmistakable shift in atmosphere, a kind of stillness, not the hush of anticipation or even the silence of luxury. It was the weight of being watched. He stood in the aisle, letting the other passengers disembark first. No need to rush. He was used to waiting, used to being looked through, over, and around. But he always noticed the pause, those half-second hesitations, the way someone's eyes would catch on his polished wingtip shoes, then climb to his sharply tailored charcoal suit, then stop, like their gaze hit something it didn't know how to process, on his skin. Dark, smooth, proud. Then came the flicker of confusion, sometimes pity, occasionally suspicion. Darius didn't flinch anymore. He'd learned long ago that the key to power wasn't reaction, it was restraint. He stepped into the terminal carrying a vintage brown leather briefcase that once belonged to his grandfather, a man who couldn't have imagined his grandson walking into rooms like this. Not in Europe, not dressed like a king. The airport was sleek, quiet, elegant, and indifferent. Outside, a black town car waited with a placard that read, Mr. D. Cole. The driver, a middle-aged Swiss man with stiff posture and colder eyes, barely acknowledged him beyond a nod. No small talk, no offer to carry the briefcase. Just a glance at Darius's face, and a blink that lasted a fraction too long. They always paused. Maybe it was because they expected someone else, someone lighter, someone older, someone whiter. As the car glided through the clean streets toward the Waldmark Grand Hotel, a centuries-old resort favored by old money and newer egos, Darius scrolled through his tablet. There were investor profiles to review, acquisition targets to analyze, a keynote speech to finalize. He had no time for distraction, yet even as he reviewed numbers and forecasts, part of his mind stayed alert. This trip wasn't just business, it was theater. And the stage had already been set with assumptions. They expected a black man in a suit to be security, or an assistant, or maybe an athlete who got lost on the way to a Nike shoot. What they would never guess, not from the surface, was that Darius Cole was the reason half the executives in attendance were still employed. His firm, Cole & Grant, had quietly invested in 29 of the Fortune 500's back-end infrastructure upgrades, from cloud security to predictive logistics. His mind wasn't flashy, but it was brilliant, and for better or worse, invisible. Until now. The car pulled up to the cobblestone entrance of the Waldmark Grand Hotel. Bellhops moved like choreographed dancers, taking bags, opening doors, ushering the wealthy and weary into gold-trimmed hallways. As Darius stepped out, the doorman didn't move. The bellhop glanced at him, then past him. It wasn't overt, not hateful, just absent, as if he didn't register. Darius exhaled quietly, not because he was hurt. He'd long learned not to give away his oxygen, but because he was tired. Tired of being the unknown quantity in a world that loved numbers. At the front desk, the young receptionist smiled at the couple in front of him, a silver-haired man and his sleek, icy wife, before turning to Darius with a stiff expression that faltered as her eyes caught his reservation name. "Mr. Cole?" she said, surprised. He nodded. "Yes, Darius Cole. Early check-in, presidential suite." She hesitated. The pause again. Of course," she said too quickly, typing. The keystrokes were louder than necessary. "I'll just need to confirm a few things. We weren't expecting... That is, the suite was previously requested by a board delegate. I wasn't informed it was reassigned. I reassigned it. My team handled it last week. Yes, I see that here now. My apologies." She gave a tight smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Behind him, someone muttered something in German and laughed. He didn't turn around. She handed him the keycard. "Room 1802. The elevator is to your right." He accepted the card without a word, without the satisfaction of confrontation, because he didn't need it. Darius knew how to walk into a room and make people uncomfortable, not by shouting, but by succeeding. They could keep their stares,
their hesitations. By the end of this summit, they wouldn't just remember his name. They'd remember the silence before he spoke, and the sound of their own regret when they realized who he was.
The elevator hummed softly as it carried Darius to the 18th floor. His reflection stared back at him from the polished metal walls, calm, unreadable, composed. But behind the stillness was another man, one only he could see. A boy, really. Wearing worn-out sneakers, hunched over a salvaged computer tower in a cramped living room in East Detroit. Long before the suit, before the private drivers, before he became Mr. Cole, there was just Darius from Linwood Avenue. His mother used to say, "The world don't give second chances to boys like you, baby, so you better not miss up the first one." She never said it unkindly. It was just truth. Sharpened truth. Life in their part of the city didn't allow room for mistakes. And for a black boy with no connections, no safety net, and no name people respected, it wasn't just about talent. It was about survival. His first computer had come from a church donation bin, an old, boxy thing with a cracked screen and a sticky keyboard. But Darius had fallen in love the moment he opened it, not just with the machine, but with what it represented. Possibility. A portal to a world where nobody saw his skin, his clothes, or his zip code, just his code. By 15, he was fixing neighborhood laptops for extra cash. By 17, he'd built his first encrypted messaging app. Nothing fancy, just functional, but it was enough to get noticed. He didn't get into Stanford the first time, or the second. Too many rejections, not enough leadership experience, whatever that meant. So he created his own experience. Built an anonymous voting system that caught the attention of a venture group, though they had no idea he was still a teenager until he walked into the coffee shop in Midtown and sat across from their rep. "You're D. Cole?" the man asked, blinking hard. "Last I checked," Darius had replied with a smile. The deal didn't go through, but the moment stayed with him. Not because he was rejected. He was used to that. It stayed with him because he saw the pattern forming, the disbelief, the hesitation, the pause. They always paused. Even now, on the other side of the world, in a hotel room that cost more per night than his mother made in a month, he felt it. The skepticism that trailed him like fog. But Detroit had taught him something else, something far more valuable than prestige. Patience, pressure, precision. He unlocked the suite and stepped inside. A vast open space greeted him. Glass walls with a view of the Alps, marble floors, soft gray couches, and a bar stocked with champagne he wouldn't touch. Darius didn't drink. He'd seen too many promising lives drowned in good intentions and bad habits. Instead, he set his briefcase on the table and pulled out a small photo frame. It was old, the corners worn, the glass slightly cracked. Inside was a picture of a teenage Darius with his mother, standing in front of their weathered apartment building. She wore her nursing scrubs. He held a certificate from the city's youth tech program. Every time you walk into a room, you walk with every person who didn't get the chance, so you better not mess up the first one. She never said it unkindly. It was just truth. Sharpened truth. Life in their part of the city didn't allow room for mistakes, and for a black boy with no connections, no safety net, and no name people respected, it wasn't just about talent. It was about survival. Out the window, the city gleamed under a European sun. He wondered if anyone down there had ever stepped over a broken streetlight to catch a city bus before sunrise. Probably not. Darius Cole had brought Detroit with him. Not the broken parts, but the bones, the foundation, the hunger. And the next morning, when he entered the investor breakfast wearing his silence like armor, those who laughed yesterday wouldn't recognize what stood before them. A man not just from the streets, but built by them. The ballroom shimmered with polished silver, fine china, and the self-satisfied hum of elite conversation. Tucked within the historic bones of the Waldmart Grand Hotel, the morning investor breakfast was less about food and more about signaling. Watches flashed subtly under cufflinks. Laughs were low, deliberate, like wine being swirled in expensive glasses. Darius entered alone. No entourage, no flashy designer labels, just the same charcoal gray suit, the unassuming confidence, and that briefcase, the one that had traveled more miles than most of the executives in the room combined. He walked past the check-in table, where a young assistant barely glanced up before asking, "Press or support staff?" Darius smiled. Neither. Oh, are you with one of the keynote speakers? I am the keynote speaker. The assistant's pen froze midair. He didn't wait for her to recover. He simply gave his name, nodded politely, and moved on. He didn't need validation. The agenda already had his title printed in bold. Darius Cole, founder and managing partner, Cole & Grant Capital. Topic: The future is quiet, investing in the infrastructure of tomorrow. As he walked, eyes followed him. Not because he demanded attention, but because his presence disrupted a pattern. He didn't fit the mold. He wasn't old money or Euro-polished. He didn't boast the academic pedigree of Oxford or INSEAD, and he didn't try to compensate. He simply was. He set his briefcase down at a corner table and sat. A waiter came by. Darius ordered black coffee, no sugar. Across the room, he spotted Andrew Belridge, CEO of a legacy shipping firm and a notorious backroom operator, leaning in close to whisper something to his VP. Both looked over at Darius, both chuckled. Darius took a sip of his coffee. The taste was bitter. He liked it that way. He opened his briefcase, revealing crisp folders, a sleek tablet, and one weathered envelope tied with a dark red ribbon. Inside were handwritten notes, his own, updated and refined since his earliest days pitching in Detroit tech incubators. He never trusted a room that relied solely on screens. "You're not what I expected," a voice said to his left. He turned. A woman, early 50s, sharp eyes, navy suit with understated pearls, stood holding her plate and coffee. "Neither are you," he replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. She sat. "Gwen Arliss. Arliss Energy. Mid-tier now, but we're hunting for scale." "I know your name. You turned down a Saudi acquisition last quarter." She raised her eyebrow. "Most people forget that." "I don't forget power moves." She studied him for a moment. "You walk like someone who's been in rooms that didn't want you there." "I walk like someone who stays anyway." She smirked. A waiter approached and offered her fresh fruit. Gwen declined. "They only offer strawberries when royalty's in the building. Looks like you're it today." From a nearby table, someone coughed just loud enough to be heard. "Careful, Gwen," another executive said with mock humor. "He might buy the building next." Darius didn't flinch. He didn't even turn his head. He calmly reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single page. An acquisition brief. Gwen leaned over slightly and read the heading. Proposal. Strategic minority stake in Arliss Energy. Valuation-based entry at $80 million. In the corner, Cole & Grant Capital. Internal draft. She blinked. "Is this—" Darius closed the briefcase again. "Just an idea. But I like what you're doing with modular grid storage. Clean tech needs quieter voices." Gwen looked at him differently now. Not as a novelty, but as a player. And across the room another whisper started, this time more cautious. The briefcase had spoken, and the whisper that followed wasn't mockery anymore. It was curiosity. And curiosity, Darius knew, was always the first step to control. The Waldmark's private library wasn't listed on any tourist guide. Tucked behind a paneled wall accessible only to VIP guests and high-tier shareholders, it resembled the inner sanctum of an old European estate. Soft leather armchairs, dark mahogany shelves, a marble fireplace crackling with low flames, and quiet that felt deliberate. Darius had been here once before, years ago, as a last-minute guest, trailing a mentor. Back then, he sat on the edge of his seat, afraid to touch anything, his eyes devouring the room like it held the secret to belonging. Now,
He sat back, one arm draped over the chair, the other nursing a cup of oolong. He didn't need to act like he belonged. He was the conversation. Across from him sat three men, each graying at the temples, each wearing tailored suits that fit like skin, each representing a corner of global finance, the type who didn't speak unless it could move billions. "Let me be frank," said the man in the middle, Charles Merriweather, chairman of the Talbot Consortium. His British accent had the perfect blend of pedigree and menace. "Your speech was surprisingly measured." Measured is how you build infrastructure. Flash is for people selling apps. I'm not here to entertain. A slight smirk twitched on the corner of Merriweather's mouth. "Which is why we are speaking now." To his right, Alphonse Garon, French, former IMF advisor, sharp as a stiletto, leaned forward. "We've been watching Colin Grant. Quiet rise, minimal headlines, no celebrity backers. Yet somehow you've gotten into ports, energy corridors, cloud architecture, the kind of deals most of our alumni don't touch without a board vote." Darius stirred his tea. "I'm allergic to noise. Legacy firms are too slow. By the time they move, I've already finished breakfast." Stanley Fox, from Vanguard Continental, chuckled under his breath. "We'd like to extend a proposal." Merriweather cut through the moment. "A seat at our next major fund. Infrastructure and equity hybrid. Buy-in minimum is $200 million. Darius set his cup down. "And the ask?" "Nothing public. You're the quiet type. We like that. Just access, perspective, and exclusivity." Ah, there it was. The real ask. Not money, not even strategy. Influence, loyalty, silence. Darius leaned back. The firelight danced across his face. "You want to attach my name, but not my voice. You want my lens, but not my story." Garan shifted uncomfortably. Merriweather maintained his stare. Darius continued calmly. "I don't do soft power for hire. If I enter a room, I do it to reshape the walls." Stanley Fox scratched his chin. "That briefcase of yours, what's in it really?" Darius smiled faintly. "Blueprints, regret, proof, and names of people who told me I wasn't ready till I outgrew their table." Silence settled between them. The fire crackled. Outside, Zurich glowed in the cold evening light. Finally, Merriweather spoke again. "You'll say no, then?" "I didn't say that. I'm just saying if you want me in, I come through the front door. My name, my terms." He picked up his briefcase and buttoned his coat. As he walked toward the door, he paused and turned back. "The game's changing. You can whisper about me, or you can partner with me. But either way, your portfolios will feel it." And with that, he left. Behind him, the fire roared louder. Or maybe that was just the sound of old empires cracking at the edges.
The elevator doors glided open with a mechanical whisper. Cool, quiet, sterile. A full-length mirror on the back wall reflected the polished marble floor and soft brass lighting, meant to exude old-money elegance. But what it captured in that moment was tension, thick and undeniable.
Darius Cole stepped inside, briefcase in hand, ties slightly loosened after hours of panels and private conversations. The summit was winding down, but he had one more meeting scheduled. Top floor, executive lounge. A casual, networking drink that never really meant networking when it involved men like the ones waiting for him. Just as the doors began to close, a hand reached through. A trio entered. 3 men, early 40s, Midwestern accents wrapped in Ivy League sarcasm, badges that read things like Senior Investment Strategist and Global Head of Strategy. Their suits were sharp, their smiles sharper. The kind of men who had laughed earlier. Darius recognized them instantly. And they recognized him. "Look who it is," said the tallest one. "Read something," his voice drenched in smug amusement. "Mr. Keynote himself. Or should I say, Mr. Infrastructure of Tomorrow." His 2 friends chuckled. Darius pressed the button for the 34th floor. None of the others did. "Let me guess," said the shorter one, blonde and square-jawed. "You're off to pitch your Qit revolution to the execs upstairs? Must be nice having PR momentum." Reed added, "It's cute, really. The whole started from the bottom vibe. People eat that stuff up." Darius said nothing. The elevator began its slow ascent. The blonde leaned against the mirrored wall and grinned. "My assistant loved your talk, by the way. Said you spoke like a preacher." That's the word she used. Preacher. You think that's the edge? That voice. The innuendo in the word wasn't subtle. Still, Darius remained composed. He glanced at his reflection, then at the men. "Funny," he said finally. "When I was in undergrad, I used to clean buildings just like this. Graveyard shift. Empty offices, vending machine dinners. Back then, suits like yours would leave coffee rings on the conference tables. You never wiped them, never cared who came behind you." The elevator stopped at 24. No one got off. He continued, voice calm but edged like steel. "And now I ride the same elevators. Except this time, the key card that unlocks the top floor, it's mine." Their smiles dimmed. Darius stepped forward, closing the distance just slightly. "You don't have to respect me. That's the beauty of this chapter. But make no mistake, this isn't charity. I earned this briefcase. Every investment I back, every acquisition I lead, is built on returns, not rhetoric." Reed scoffed. "You sound like you think you're untouchable." Darius leaned in just enough. "No, I'm just not afraid of the rooms you're afraid to lose." Ding! Floor 34. The doors opened to a marble hallway bathed in golden light. A concierge stood waiting. "Mr. Ohl," she said, "they're ready for you." Darius stepped out, adjusted his jacket, and turned back. "Oh, and boys," he added casually, "by next quarter, 2 of your firms will be negotiating buyout terms with one of my startups. Maybe keep the laughter in the lobby next time." He didn't wait for a reply. The door slid shut behind him. The 3 men stood in the quiet that followed, no longer laughing.
Before Darius Cole was Mr. Cole, before Forbes covers and equity talks with billionaires, before hotel suites in Switzerland and buyouts that sent shockwaves through Wall Street, he was just D, a kid from the east side of Detroit who never waited for a door to open. He broke the damn wall down instead. The media called him self-made. That wasn't quite right. He was self-forged, tempered in neighborhoods where streetlights went out, but hope didn't, where asking for permission meant waiting forever. And he'd learned early that waiting was a luxury the world wouldn't give a black boy with ambition. At 12, he fixed his first motherboard from a junked-out desktop a neighbor left on the curb. At 15, he hacked into his high school's closed server, not to cheat,
but to find out why black students were being pushed toward trade electives while others got coding electives. At 19, when a Stanford recruiter said his SAT scores were impressive for where you come from, he smiled, said thank you, and chose MIT instead. No one ever offered him a seat at the table, so he built his own table. Then he bought the house it sat in. Now, in the glow of the 34th floor suite at the Waldmark, with Zurich's lights sprawling beneath him like circuitry, he stood alone at the glass window, remembering it all. Behind him, soft jazz played. The networking drinks were over. The big names had gone home, murmuring about terms, acquisitions, and Cole's quiet confidence. None of them knew the fire beneath the surface. None of them saw how every smile hid a memory of being overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. He wasn't bitter. He was focused. Earlier that day, an exec from a major telecom firm had asked, "What drives you, Darius?" He had answered with a smirk, "Same thing that built this whole city, pressure." But the real answer sat deeper. It was his mother's tired feet from working double shifts, his brother's scholarship lost to budget cuts, the look on a bank officer's face when Darius applied for a startup loan in a hoodie and khakis. The time an investor said, "You've got hustle, but we're looking for someone more polished." Every rejection, every side-eye, every room he wasn't supposed to be in. Now, he was in them all. And not just in them, rearranging them. The concierge knocked softly on the open door. "Mr. Cole, your car is ready." He turned, briefcase in hand. "Tell them I'll walk." She blinked. "It's nearly freezing, sir." "I know," he said, sliding on his coat, "but I like the cold. Reminds me I'm still moving." As he stepped out into the night air, wind slicing sharp against his face, Darius Cole walked like a man who never needed green lights or gatekeepers. He was the man who never asked for permission. And the world was finally beginning to realize that that was the most dangerous kind of man to underestimate.
The world knew Darius Cole as a venture capitalist, a tech visionary, a CEO with a gaze sharp enough to cut through inflated valuations and sugar-coated pitches. But before the boardrooms and billion-dollar exits, he was just a boy running through the cracked sidewalks of Gratiot Street, where dreams were loud, but resources were silent. The street didn't look like much from the outside. Boarded-up liquor stores, potholes deep enough to swallow tires, graffiti that changed weekly. But to Darius, it was a battlefield of character, and it taught him everything school didn't. He remembered the way his mother clutched her purse a little tighter every time sirens passed, the way Mr. Jennings, the old man from 2 doors down, used to fix radios on his porch while humming old Motown tunes, the way his older brother Marcus protected him from the older boys who didn't care if you were 12 or 20. You had to learn fast or get left behind. Gratiot didn't give out second chances. It didn't coddle. It didn't explain. But it built men, or it broke them. Darius chose the first. At 10, he sold candy bars outside the corner barber shop, undercutting the gas station by 25 cents. At 13, he created a crude budgeting app on his mother's prepaid Android, just to help her stretch groceries until the next paycheck. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. By senior year, he was tutoring kids twice his age in algebra and computer science, not because he wanted extra credit, but because he knew no one was coming to save them. One of those kids, Tyrese, would later get locked up. Another, Cam, would join the Marines. And Darius? He built his first prototype for a real-time crowdsourced safety map for Detroit buses. Local teachers laughed. A regional grant committee denied him. He still built it anyway. He launched it using school library computers after hours. It crashed in its first week. Then it grew. By senior year, local bus drivers were quietly recommending his app to passengers, and by graduation, the city's Department of Transit sent him an email. "Would you consider a consultation meeting?" He never forgot that email. Not because of the meeting, but because of the signature at the bottom.
Respectfully, Dr. Yolanda Pierce. That was the first time anyone in power had spoken to him with respect. That was the moment he realized the world was willing to listen, but only if you made enough noise first. Now, standing in the mirror of his five-star suite, he looked at the man he had become. But in the way his shoulders squared, the way his jaw tightened at injustice, the way he noticed everything others tried to hide, Gratiot Street was still there. It always would be, because success hadn't replaced where he came from. It had been forged in it. And the boy from Gratiot Street wasn't done yet. He was just getting started.
They said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring your own chair. Darius Cole did one better. He built the whole damn table. Not from mahogany or polished marble, not gilded in brass or carved with heritage crests. His table was made from code, vision, sleepless nights, and the kind of silence that only dreamers and the dismissed know well. And when he was done building, the very men who once ignored him were begging to sit. It began with a rejection, like most of his beginnings. At 24, armed with an MIT degree and a prototype for a blockchain-based identity platform for the unbanked, Darius pitched to 5 VC firms in New York. All white-owned, all impressed, none invested. One of them even said, "You're brilliant, but we're unsure how this scales in your market." Your market. That phrase stuck like grit under the fingernail of his ambition. So Darius stopped pitching to their table. He founded Orobit with 2 engineers from Ghana and 1 investor, a retired janitor from his old neighborhood, who gave him $3,000 and said, "I believe you, D." That was enough. It took 4 years, dozens of pivots, and nearly losing everything in a 3 a.m. server crash. But when Orobit launched in Latin America, it onboarded 1 million users in its first 6 months. The same VCs who passed on him? Now they sent congratulatory emails. Now they wanted lunch. Now they used words like visionary. Darius smiled politely, then said no. Instead, he created the Pivot Fund, a venture capital firm explicitly designed to back founders like him, overlooked, underestimated, unapologetically black, brown, immigrant, female, neurodivergent, queer, anyone who'd been told they didn't fit the room. He didn't just build a new table. He rewrote the guest list. He opened the floor for founders who wore hoodies instead of suits, whose pitch decks had typos because English was their second language, who had ideas no one in Silicon Valley dared touch because they weren't sexy. And what did the world learn? Those ideas made money, real impact. Sitting in the private lounge of the Zurich Conference Center, sipping mint tea while CEOs postured over single malt scotch, Darius reviewed the latest fund metrics. His firm had backed 47 companies. 28 were profitable, 5 had IPO'd, 1 had been acquired by Google last month. And the table kept growing. A woman approached, early 30s, sharp eyes, nervous posture. "Mr. Cole?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Amina. I just wanted to say, your story changed how I pitch. You made space I didn't think existed." He looked her in the eye and replied with quiet clarity. "Then make more." Because his table wasn't a monument to himself. It was an invitation. To build more tables, break more doors, leave none behind.
The ballroom at the Grand Europa Hotel glittered with polished ambition, pressed suits, gleaming watches, and power smiles. But Darius Cole, standing at the edge of it all, felt the old ache return. The ache of a room that wasn't built for him, but now couldn't move without him. He wasn't scheduled to speak tonight. He hadn't RSVP'd to this particular investor mixer. He didn't have a pitch deck. No slideshow, no tagline, no dramatic market projections. He didn't need any of it. He was there for a different reason. Across the room stood Nigel Crenshaw, managing partner at Everlane Capital, a man who once told Darius over email, I think your talents are better suited for advisory roles. You may not have the leadership polish investors look for. Tonight, Crenshaw was surrounded by junior partners nodding like metronomes while he sipped a 12-year Dalmore and dropped buzzwords like breadcrumbs. Darius approached with no champagne flute, no entourage. Just presence. Crenshaw looked up, blinked, and pasted on a smile. Darius Cole, heard you were in Zurich. Couldn't stay away from the spotlight, huh? No, I came to meet someone who doesn't know I already bought the company he's courting. The junior partners stilled. Crenshaw's smile cracked. Excuse me? I acquired Nixia Labs this morning. Quiet deal, all equity. Your team's been circling them for months, right? Darius sipped water. You'll need a new AI portfolio anchor. There it was again. That pause. The one where people recalibrate who they're speaking to. You've come a long way, Crenshaw muttered. No, Darius replied, eyes steady. You've just stayed in place too long. He didn't linger. He turned and walked away, crossing the ballroom not like a disruptor, but like the new establishment. Minutes later, on the garden terrace, he found her. Kemi Adewale, founder of an early-stage clean water tech startup based in Nigeria. She wore a dress 2 seasons old and carried a laptop bag with a broken zipper. But her eyes? Those were founder eyes. Fire beneath exhaustion, vision in the cracks. Mr. Cole, she said, straightening. Darius, he corrected, extending his hand. I've read your white paper. You're not pitching tonight, are you? She shook her head. Wasn't invited. He nodded. Good. Neither was I. They talked for 20 minutes, not about growth models, but about water rights, colonial infrastructure, and how Lagos rooftops could become solar purification hubs. She never pitched. He never asked her to. But when she stood to leave, he said, The Pivot Fund will write your first check. She froze. But I didn't. I know. You didn't need to. You're not just solving a problem, you're rewriting the equation. Darius watched her disappear into the crowd, her steps suddenly lighter. And in that moment, he realized something. The real pitch, the one that matters, doesn't happen on slides. It happens in how you listen, in who you notice, in who you refuse to let remain invisible.
The private jet sliced through the clouds above the Atlantic, silent but for the hum of purpose. Darius sat alone, his laptop closed, his phone off. For once, the numbers could wait. The victories could breathe. The world, for all its noise, had gone quiet. He stared out at the endless gray stretch of sky and sea, but his mind was already on the ground, in Detroit, where the streets still remembered the boy who once sprinted barefoot through alleyways, dodging broken glass and lost futures. He was going home. But this time, it wasn't nostalgia that pulled him back. It was unfinished business. Beneath all the press and praise, the Forbes features and speaking tours, there was a silence he hadn't addressed in years. A promise made at a hospital bedside with the beeping machines keeping time as his mother whispered through pain. Don't forget who you are, just because they finally see you. Darius hadn't forgotten, but he hadn't returned either. Not since the funeral. Not since the night he watched the house on Gratiot Street fade in the rearview mirror, the porch light still flickering as if waiting for someone who wouldn't come back. The plane began its descent, and with it came the weight, not of shame, but of responsibility. He wasn't the boy anymore, and Gratiot Street wasn't just memory. It was a mission. At the airport, no entourage met him, no camera crews, just Marcus. His older brother stood next to an old black pickup, same one from high school, the passenger door still stuck. Marcus grinned as Darius approached. Look at you, Marcus said, pulling him in for a hug. You still smell like Switzerland. And you still wear socks with sandals, Darius quipped. They drove without music. Detroit's skyline grew closer, but the real city started far before the high-rises. They passed rows of houses tattooed by time, storefronts painted with murals of survival. You sure you want to do this? Marcus asked. I have to. They turned onto Gratiot Street. Some of it was worse. Some of it had bloomed. The house was still there,
boarded up now but intact. The tree they used to climb as kids had bent with age but still reached skyward, as stubborn as ever. Inside, dust coated everything, like a memory you couldn't wash away. In the back bedroom, he opened the closet, revealing a box marked in his mother's handwriting, D.C. Photos, letters, a half-finished quilt, and beneath it all, a worn composition notebook titled, If I Owned a School, by Darius Cole, age 11. He laughed. Then he wept. Because even back then he knew he didn't just want a seat at the table. He wanted to change the entire system that built the table. That night, in a diner lit by flickering neon, he told Marcus his plan. A nonprofit incubator in Detroit. Not just tech, education, equity, and entrepreneurship. A pipeline for local kids. Free laptops, mentorship, seed grants, and one rule. No one gets turned away for how they look, where they're from, or what they've lost. Marcus raised his coffee cup to the kid from Gratiot. But Darius shook his head. To every kid still on it. I'm not building this for me. I'm building it for them. The next morning, he filed the paperwork. The city didn't know it yet, but something was coming. Something real. Something built to last.
It started with a voicemail, not from a banker, not from an investor, from Marisol Vega, an old friend from a long-forgotten conference in Sao Paulo. Back then, she was just an idealist with tangled curls and a busted tablet, talking about renewable energy in slums while no one listened. Now, she was the co-founder of Solvita, one of the fastest-growing solar infrastructure startups in South America. Darius, her voice crackled through the line, half breathless, half defiant. They're trying to buy us out, a firm out of London, but they only want the patents. They're going to gut the social impact wing. I thought maybe you'd know what to do. Darius hadn't spoken to Marisol in nearly 5 years, but that message felt like an old door swinging open. One he thought he'd closed after Zurich, after Detroit. But it wasn't over. It never really was. The next morning, he flew to Bogota. No public fanfare, no press. Just Darius Cole, in a plain navy hoodie, sitting across from Marisol in a converted garage where Solvita's first prototype still hung like a sacred artifact. She looked older now, like him. Sharper, tired but resilient. They offered $85 million for control, she said. It's a smart number. Most of our board is leaning yes. And what do you want? He asked. She hesitated. I want to stay whole. I want to keep our mission alive. Darius leaned back, considering. What if I make them a counteroffer? Marisol blinked. You mean buy us? No, he said. Partner. He proposed a structure unheard of in her world. Majority employee ownership, with the pivot fund backing expansion, not takeover. Her engineers would stay, her communities would stay, she'd remain CEO. The only condition? The first Solvita U.S. pilot would launch in Detroit. Marisol stared at him. That's not how these deals work, Darius. He smiled. It is now. 3 weeks later, the headlines broke. Cole's pivot fund blocks UK buyout of Solvita in groundbreaking partnership deal. A new playbook for equitable scale. Social impact isn't for sale. The London firm was furious. Industry analysts were stunned. And quietly, under their breath, many old gatekeepers asked the same question. Who does Darius Cole think he is? But the people who mattered didn't ask. The kids in Detroit, who now studied STEM under solar-lit rooftops, the families in Rio's favelas whose homes powered themselves after dark, and Marisol, who held her ground
and got to keep her dream. They didn't ask. They already knew. He was a man who no longer played by the old rules, because he was too busy rewriting them.
The room was dimly lit, not by accident, but by design. Inside a restored automotive factory turned headquarters in downtown Detroit, the first full gathering of the Pivot Fund was underway. No velvet drapes, no sleek LED stages, just exposed brick, reclaimed wood tables, and a long wall lined with portraits of overlooked visionaries, Black inventors, Latina scientists, Asian American engineers, Native entrepreneurs, each one a silent witness to the revolution unfolding below. Darius stood at the head of the room, sleeves rolled, no tie. He scanned the crowd, some old friends, many new allies, all builders of something different. "This isn't a fund," he began, voice steady. "It's a rebellion." A few in the room chuckled. Most nodded, because they understood what he meant. The Pivot Fund wasn't about chasing unicorns. It was about correcting history, rebalancing scales, and proving that impact wasn't charity. It was the smartest investment anyone could make. Darius clicked a remote. The screen behind him lit up with 3 pillars: access, autonomy, and accountability. He walked them through the new portfolio. A young Black woman in Atlanta building a decentralized childcare co-op using AI. 2 brothers in Tulsa repurposing abandoned malls into microcampuses. An indigenous-led startup developing modular clean water units for reservations. Each one funded, each one believed in. But it wasn't just startups he was betting on. It was infrastructure of trust. After the presentations ended, Darius slipped outside. The Detroit night wrapped around him like a memory. It smelled like old metal and new hope. That's when he saw the smoke. Not metaphorical, actual smoke. Across the street, a row of vacant homes, ones the fund had earmarked for restoration, was on fire. The flames licked up like hungry spirits trying to devour everything before morning. Within minutes, Darius was on the phone. Fire crews arrived fast. Too fast. He knew what this was. Arson. A message. The kind sent by developers and power players who didn't like what he was doing, who saw the Pivot Fund as a threat to the established real estate order. When the fire was out, only charred beams and cracked stone remained. But Darius didn't flinch. He returned to the office that same night and called an emergency board session. He said, "We rebuild, but we do more than that." He announced a new initiative. For every property targeted, 5 more would be restored. Each one turned into community equity housing, each one owned, in part, by the families who lived there. The Pivot Fund would become not just a venture catalyst, but a land trust, a fireproof foundation. They called it the Reclaim Project. It made national news within 48 hours. Some cheered, some panicked. But for Darius, it wasn't about attention. It was about showing them you can't burn down a future that's already rising. Later that week, he sat alone again, this time in his old bedroom, now converted into a quiet office. He opened his mother's notebook. The last page was blank. He picked up a pen and wrote, "The world changed, not because we waited, but because we built it ourselves." And under that, in neat, steady letters, Darius Cole, founder of the Pivot Fund, Grattan Street, always.
It was raining in San Francisco, the kind of steady drizzle that blurred the city's skyline into a watercolor of glass and fog. Darius sat alone at a window table inside the Lantern, a quiet Vietnamese cafe tucked between overpriced galleries and venture capital firms. He wasn't there for the foe. He was waiting for a meeting he hadn't asked for. At exactly 12:15 p.m., 3 men and 1 woman walked in, all in muted suits, carrying the weight of old money and old rules. One of them, Harlan Whitman, a founding partner of Fairbridge Capital, nodded at Darius like they were old colleagues. They weren't. Harlan had once called Darius a charity case with delusions of scale in a leaked email. Now he was early. They sat without invitation. The woman, sharp-eyed and soft-voiced, leaned forward first. "Mr. Cole, we'd like to talk about opportunities, real opportunities, joint ventures, possible acquisitions, maybe even board appointments." Darius didn't blink. "I'm listening." But inside, he wasn't surprised. The pivot fund's rise had done more than just shake headlines. It had shifted capital. His portfolio companies were outperforming legacy brands. His housing model was being studied in 4 cities, and the latest Solavita partnership already profitable. In just 2 years, he'd rewritten the metrics of success, and now the gatekeepers were at his door. Whitman cleared his throat. "We admit, we misjudged. Your model works, and frankly, we'd rather be at the table than left behind." Darius stirred his tea. "You mean," he said calmly, "you'd rather buy in now than be regulated out later?" Silence. The older man gave a tight smile. "Let's not make this personal." "But it is," Darius said, voice cool but unshakable. "It always was. When I walked in rooms, you saw risk where you should have seen vision. You saw my skin before my strategy. And now that we've built something undeniable, you want in." He looked each of them in the eye. "You want a piece of the table we bled to build." The woman spoke again. "So what would it take, Darius? What would convince you we're serious?" He leaned back. For a moment, the boy from Gratiot Street stared through the man from Silicon Valley. Then he smiled. "3 things," he said. "First, you match dollar for dollar every pivot fund investment in undercapitalized founders for the next 5 years, publicly." They nodded, scribbling. "Second, 30% of your board seats go to people from communities you've never hired from. Real representation, no interns, no token faces." They hesitated, but nodded again. "And third," Darius paused, letting it hang, "no deals unless you attend a full-day training in one of our funding neighborhoods. You'll walk the streets, talk to the people. You'll meet the families your money forgets." Whitman's smile faltered. "That's unorthodox." "So was your bias," Darius said, standing up. "You want in? Start there." He dropped a business card, black, embossed, with just 2 words in silver foil: "Build different." Then he walked out. Later that week, Fairbridge Capital posted a press release. "In partnership with the Pivot Fund, we pledge to reinvest in the future we once ignored." No logos, no loud campaigns. But across cities, founders who looked like Darius, who had always been told "not now" or "not quite," started getting real calls, real checks. And somewhere in Detroit, a boy who once dreamed in cracked ceilings and concrete saw his reflection in the glass towers and smiled. Because for the first time in generations, the gate had opened from the inside.
The old train station in Detroit hadn't seen life in decades. Once a symbol of American expansion, it had crumbled into graffiti-covered ruin until Darius bought it, not to flip it, not to revitalize it for boutique lofts, but to reclaim it. On a brisk Saturday morning, the doors opened again, not to bankers or politicians, but to people who had never been invited to the table. He called it the Summit of the Uninvited. No suits required, no press releases, no hierarchy. Instead, folding chairs were arranged in circles, food trucks lined the block. Inside, the platform was covered in murals painted by neighborhood kids. Jazz blended with hip-hop over speakers. The registration table was run by grandmothers and high schoolers alike. It wasn't a summit in the traditional sense. It was a declaration. One by one, founders, builders, artists, educators, and elders stepped up, not to pitch, but to testify. A woman from South Dallas spoke about launching a solar-powered mobile clinic from a former ice cream truck. A Somali-American coder from Minneapolis unveiled a new crypto wallet designed for refugee remittances.
A formerly incarcerated man from Oakland presented his re-entry housing initiative that had a 0% recidivism rate. None of them had Ivy League resumes. None of them had ever raised a Series A. All of them were building empires from the margins. Darius didn't speak until the second day, and even then, he didn't stand on the main platform. He stood among them, mic in hand, hoodie on, no flash. When they didn't invite us, we didn't protest for a seat. We built the table. We set it, we lit the candles, and we opened the doors. A pause. Silence. Let this summit be proof. We are not waiting for permission. Not anymore. Cheers erupted, not loud and performative, but real, raw like gospel. Later, as the day wound down, a small group gathered in the station's upper level. The air smelled of paint and possibility. Among them was Lena, a teenage activist from Flint who'd organized clean water drives since age 12. "I'm not sure what I want to be yet," she admitted, "but I know I want to lead something that matters." Darius looked at her, then reached into his jacket. He handed her a worn leather journal, the same one his mother had given him. "It's yours now. Write the future before someone else tries to." She didn't know what to say, so she nodded, hard. The summit closed without fanfare. No awards, no selfies. Just handshakes, hugs, ideas exchanged like currency. A new economy of trust. But the headlines couldn't ignore it. Grassroots gathering draws national eyes. The uninvited just took the mic. From rejected to respected, Darius Cole's bold new blueprint. Weeks later, universities asked to partner, mayors asked to visit, funds asked to sponsor. But none of that mattered to Darius, because he knew the real power wasn't in who came, it was in who finally felt like they belonged.
The building was quiet, not silent. There was the gentle hum of servers, the occasional murmur of a page turning, the soft footsteps of a student wandering through exhibits, but quiet in the way that places of deep thought always are. The Darius Cole Center for Radical Innovation had no gates, no marble statues, just glass, reclaimed brick, and light that spilled in from high ceilings like a promise. At the center of it all was a single room called the Archive. It didn't store patents, not exactly, not business plans, not annual reports. It stored stories, not just of Darius, but of every person, every venture, every voice that had once been dismissed as too risky, too loud, too different. On one wall, projected in a slow-moving reel, were photos. A girl with beads in her braids wiring a circuit board. A group of formerly unhoused veterans cutting the ribbon to their own co-op. A classroom in Mississippi where the kids had built a solar-powered garden. Each image paused just long enough to whisper, "You matter." In the far corner was a shelf labeled The Rejections, printed out emails, handwritten notes, VC meeting scribbles that read things like "not scalable" or "too urban," or simply "pass." Underneath it, a plaque. "The fire they tried to put out is what we used to build the engine." Darius walked through the center with Lena, now 22, a rising leader in climate equity and the center's youngest director. She carried a tablet loaded with entries from the oral history project she'd led, over 300 interviews with underrepresented founders across the US, Ghana, India, Brazil. They were all archived here, searchable, teachable, undeniable. "Do you think it's enough?" Lena asked, her voice low. Darius looked out the window to the garden outside, where kids were testing a new irrigation prototype built from recycled street pipes. "No," he said, "but I think it's a beginning." He turned to her. "They'll keep trying to forget us, erase what we build, water down the truth, but every time they do, we'll already have the receipts, the footage, the files, the archive." She nodded, absorbing it. Outside, a class from the local high school arrived.
Among them, a tall, shy boy with deep brown skin stared up at the plaque near the entrance. You were never too late. You were never too much. You were always the revolution they feared. D.C. He didn't know who Darius Cole was. Not yet. But he would. Because the archive would still be here. And in it lived the proof that we were never invisible, only underestimated. And that, in the right hands, is how legacies are forged.